The event, held on 8th of October 2025, is part of UCL's The State of the United States series, which invites prominent U.S. legal and political figures to reflect on challenges to democracy, constitutional norms, and institutional resilience. Jack Smith is the former U.S. Special Counsel, appointed in November 2022 to oversee two DOJ investigations into former President Donald Trump, one focused on alleged interference in the 2020 election and January 6th, and the other on retention of classified documents. Andrew Weissmann, his interlocutor, is a well-known former federal prosecutor, Mueller's team, and legal scholar, bringing expertise on prosecutorial norms, accountability, and constitutional law. From the outset, the conversation is structured as a defense of the integrity of Smith's office and broader institutions, but also a warning about pressures eroding rule of law norms in U.S. governance. Core arguments and claims by Jack Smith: denial of political motivation and emphasis on prosecutorial integrity. A central theme is Smith's forceful denial that his investigations were politically motivated. He repeatedly asserts that the notion of political interference in such high-stakes prosecutions is absurd or absolutely ludicrous, arguing it runs contrary to his decades of experience as a career prosecutor. Smith describes his team as composed of team players who don't want anything but to do good in the world, lawyers of integrity without partisan agendas. He insists that decisions to indict, prosecute, or charge were driven purely by the facts and legal standards, not by political pressure or the desire to affect electoral outcomes. He draws a contrast to critics who, in his view, want to start from a desired result and then reinterpret rules to achieve it. He says one cannot say, "I want this outcome, let me discard the rules." 2. The legal and factual basis of his investigations. Smith offers several points to underscore that his investigations were rooted in rigorous legal standards, willfulness and obstruction in the classified documents case. He emphasizes the evidence of willfulness, that Trump resisted efforts to return classified documents, publicly insisted on retaining them, and otherwise obstructed compliance when requested. Smith argues that these facts distinguish the case from other classified documents situations, e.g., other former presidents, asserting that the evidence supported charging accountability in the January 6th election interference domain. In his view, failing to pursue accountability for efforts to subvert democratic processes would set a dangerous precedent. He contends that norms cannot be rewritten to shield those in power. Smith does not shy from acknowledging that these are difficult and politically sensitive cases, but he presents them as necessary to uphold constitutional stability. 3. Threats to norms, institutional resilience, and the rule of law. Perhaps the more forward-looking dimension of the discussion is Smith's concern over the erosion of institutional norms and the pressure to treat rules as optional when politically convenient. He warns that the independence of the judiciary and of prosecutorial institutions is under strain. When the executive or political actors treat procedural rules or institutional norms as malleable, the legitimacy of the system suffers. Smith expresses unease about how career staff and DOJ personnel can be sidelined or purged for being perceived as obstacles, which undermines institutional memory, professionalism, and trust. He frames the Trump years and his prosecutions as testing the durability of constitutional hardball, i.e., when political actors push institutions to their limits. He suggests that democratic resilience depends on legal institutions standing firm in the face of such pressure. 4. Challenges, critiques, and accountability. Although much of the tone is defensive, Smith also addresses critiques and the complexity of oversight. He recognizes the challenges of perception. Even if a prosecutorial act is legally justified, it may be portrayed as political. That perception risk, he implies, is part of the burden on prosecutors in highly polarized times. He implicitly acknowledges that decisions in his role have had real political consequences. The tension between accountability and appearance is a constant backdrop. The broader context: Republicans in Congress have demanded that Smith testify and produce documents, accusing his office of politicization. Smith argues that oversight is legitimate, but must respect prosecutorial independence and norms rather than be a blunt instrument of political interference. Strengths: tensions, and broader implications. Strengths: credibility rooted in prosecutorial identity. Smith leans heavily on his background as a career DOJ figure and on the character of his staff to lend credibility to his claims of neutrality. Norms as central narrative. He shifts the focus from individual cases to institutional integrity, which allows him to make a deeper argument about the stakes for U.S. constitutionalism. Willingness to engage public scrutiny. By participating in such a public event and defending his work, he demonstrates transparency, or at least the appearance of it, in navigating controversies. Tensions and critiques. Perception versus reality. Even a convincingly neutral prosecutor can struggle against cynical perceptions in a polarized environment. In particular, some critics will dismiss his claims as self-serving, regardless of his arguments. Selective detail. In such a conversational setting, Smith necessarily omits internal memos, tactical deliberations, and details that might be more revealing. Critics will likely call for full disclosure beyond the forum's ornamental constraints. The burden of exceptionalism. By framing his actions as extraordinary but necessary, Smith implicitly claims a uniqueness that may not always translate into defensibility in other cases or contexts. Institutional fragility. His warnings about institutional erosion acknowledge that norms are not self-enforcing. They require vigilance, and they may already be degraded. Broader democratic stakes. Smith's interview is not merely a defense of his own work. It is a statement about how U.S. democracy handles accountability, executive power, and institutional pushback. He argues that if powerful actors can flout procedural rules when convenient, then the legitimacy of the rule of law is undermined. He suggests that legal institutions must withstand external pressures if democratic governance is to survive. In effect, he stakes much of his moral argument on the link between prosecutorial independence and democratic health. His broader message, the long-term stability of constitutional norms, may depend not only on what his office has done, but on how the public, Congress, the courts, and civil society respond to these questions of process, fairness, and accountability.